Thank you very much for spending a little bit of time with us. I appreciate it, but it will take a minute or two for everyone to get in, get your coffee, get settled. Yeah, and there's still a couple of people getting settled in right now. So say like another 30 seconds and we're good to go. Today we're talking about selling cloud opportunities. My name is Carrie Simpson. I'm the CEO of Managed Sales Pros. I've been working with vendors and managed service providers for the last 7 years, helping them grow their monthly recurring revenue by identifying opportunities for them to connect one-on-one with their best prospects. With me today is Madison Beal. Hey, Maddie.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us today.
No problem.
Today's agenda is the following. We're going to welcome you to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. Housekeeping. If you would like to interact with either Madison or myself throughout the webinar, we will be taking questions at about the 40-minute mark. So you are more than welcome to pop those questions into the Q&A panel early, or you can hold them until that 40-minute mark. And if you'd like to specify who you want to answer your question, we won't fall all over each other trying to answer the same questions. So just indicate what you'd like answered and who you'd like to answer it, and we will try to get to all of those questions as they arrive. You're going to meet your presenters, and then we're going to talk about how you introduce the cloud to new SMB prospects. Then we're going to talk about the cadences that lead to success. I want to talk a little bit about how people are using Microsoft Teams successfully for land and expand opportunities. And then at the end, we're just going to tell you a couple of things you should avoid saying when you're calling for cloud opportunities. And talk a little bit about the difference between selling a managed services opportunity and a cloud opportunity. So on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a chat panel. There's a couple of different features there. There's a Q&A panel as well as a chat panel. We've disabled the public chat panel because usually when I'm presenting and people are chatting on the side, I find it distracting and it runs the whole time. So that feature is disabled. However, you are able to present questions directly to one of us or to pose that question to the room as a whole as a Q&A chat. And then you can click there's a checkbox that you can click once the question's been answered. You can upvote them. I actually never use those features, so I can't tell you much more about how that thing works. It's a brand new platform. So far, I'm finding it better than GoToWebinar. So at the 40-minute mark, we're going to do some Q&A. The recording will be available on the Managed Sales Pros website. And for anybody that's registered today, you'll receive an email afterwards with a link to the recording on the Big Marker platform. We don't send out the slides independent of the webinar. So if you'd like to see it again, you'll need to watch the download. But I've already introduced myself. So Madison is a cloud sales specialist. She works for a managed service provider in Canada. Madison, you're a third-year university student. How did you end up cold calling? Most people at 21 aren't doing a lot of cold calling. They're working retail or hospitality. Tell me how you got involved in this.
So I'd seen my mom and my aunt do cold calling before, and they really enjoyed it. And I got into it when I was 14, and I worked on a campaign for an engineering company. And since about 14, I've been cold calling on and off. And it helps me work around my university schedule, which is really important.
So were you planning on, getting a master's in cold calling?
No, I wasn't, but I'm really enjoying it. I think it's a really good job for me, and I think I do well at it. And yeah, I think I'd like to continue with it.
So career path-wise, how do you see cold calling translating into other skills later on in your future career plans?
Well, I think cold calling experience-wise is one of the most versatile opportunities you can have as a young person. It helps you build confidence speaking with champions in organizations and decision makers in organizations, which is obviously very important going forward. It has helped me develop interpersonal skills with communication. So when it comes to using filler words or asking closed-ended questions. This has really helped me. And I think just working in an office environment is so important. Learning how to comport yourself within an office environment is so important. And I've really, really loved working with my job currently. So I think it'll set me up for the rest of my life.
Excellent answer. Thank you. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about introducing the cloud to prospects. So normally the content that I'm delivering involves selling managed services. And there's a big difference between selling a traditional managed services opportunity and a cloud services or cloud sales opportunity. And the key differentiator here in my mind at this time is that managed services is a displacement sale. And an easier way to describe that is managed services is a knockout. Right? Everybody has IT support. Everybody's having that need met in some way, whether it's the guy next door that fixes their computer for a case of beer and $50, or your most competent competitor in the market. Everybody has that need met. So a displacement sale, like managed services, is highly dependent on timing. If you call them 3 days after they sign a 3-year engagement, you don't have the opportunity to sell to that company again for 3 more years. There are not very many things that you could do to disrupt a sale at that point. If you're not first, you may never get the opportunity to be there, right? Whereas cloud sales right now is what I would describe as a disruptive opportunity or a land grab opportunity. So a disruptive opportunity, disruption is always in the eye of the beholder, not in the eye of the seller. So cloud may not be all that interesting or new to the companies that are selling it, but it's a new concept for the people that are buying it. And there's going to be some challenges around selling a brand new thing to people that just haven't considered it yet. So when you're talking about cloud, you've got the opportunity to introduce a new idea, and that creates some good opportunity in the sales process, but it also is going to delay the process. So the education factor required is significantly higher. When you're talking about managed services, and most of the time we wouldn't use the word managed services on a call, we would just say IT support. The minute somebody says, what? So if you say, I'm calling to talk to you about managed services, and the prospect says, what? Right? At that point, you've already lost them a little bit. Everyone understands what IT support is, and that's why we talk about it that way. So at that point, everybody's going to say something, either going to say, we're good with what we have, we're not interested, or tell me more, right? And the tell me more conversations are few and far between. Though we already have that conversations will make up about 90% of the calls that you make. And then the rest of it you can play with a bit. But there's some education required when you've got a new concept. So if you think about the sales process, 100% of the sales process in a displacement market, 20% of the sales process is education, and 80% of the process is just staying top of mind until it's your turn to take an at bat again, right? So it's just a constant follow-up, 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 follow-up. You're not spending a lot of time at the beginning of the process explaining to people what IT support is. They know what that is. They're already buying it. They get it. When you move into cloud, you now have to educate the very same people that were educated on buying managed services when there was a land grab. So the difference between managed and cloud now is knockout or new opportunity. So you get to have a different type of conversation with the same type of buyer. And you should expect that instead of having to spend all of your time chasing down the lead, most of your conversations are going to be about the cloud, why the cloud, when the cloud, how the cloud. You're going to educate your prospects at the beginning of the sales cycle. And that is the part of the process that will take the lion's share of your time. So it's a little bit of a different sale. So you're going to structure your processes differently, and you're going to structure your follow-up cadences differently. So today we're going to talk about the cadences that are working in the cloud sales environment. So you have to pivot your sales process a little bit. So if you've been selling managed services successfully for the last 5 years, and you've got it down to a bit of a science, that's about to change, right? There's something new happening in the market. And every time that happens, you have the risk of losing your clients to competitors who are having conversations that sound a little bit different than yours. The good news is you also get to have those conversations to displace your competitors. So When you're talking about cloud, you're going to present it differently than whatever it is that they're currently buying. So you don't want it to sound like identical. You don't want to sell managed services light or managed services different. You want to have a conversation that doesn't make them think, oh, we're already buying that. So the initial part of the conversation has to be pivoted so that you can have a conversation with a company that's already engaged with an IT provider. So you don't want them shutting down the conversation and saying, we already have that, because they don't. If they've got a traditional network environment, they're not buying cloud, and you've got to keep them on the phone long enough to educate them. There's also going to be fewer referrals. So to you, the cloud isn't new, it isn't innovative, it isn't interesting. You've been selling it for years and we call it something else. However, for the prospect, they're not going to have, for example, if you're used to building your business on referrals, right? People aren't going to, off the top of their mind, know who's going to be interested in moving to the cloud the same way they might be aware of people in their network, for example, who are moving. And moving is a perfect time to evaluate if you're going to change IT service provider. So that doesn't eliminate cloud offerings from that conversation. But if you're having specific conversations about cloud and not having conversations about everything you do holistically, now you've got a little bit more of a challenge. So there's two ways you can prospect for cloud. You can start talking about generic IT and then narrow your focus to discuss the cloud, or you can go in as a cloud specialist and not talk about anything else. So the first step in your sales process when you're starting to sell cloud is to decide, are you going to be a specialist or are you going to be a generalist? If you are a generalist, you're going to have more conversations and more opportunities to be at bat. If you are a specialist, you're going to narrow your target and your focus. You're going to be able to charge more for the same solutions that other people are currently offering. And that's simply because if all you do is one thing for one type of business, you can charge significantly more. So you can be a cloud specialist for lawyers, or you can be an IT company that works with businesses with between 10 and 50 employees, right? One of them gives you a whole lot more options, and one of them allows you to be perceived in a completely different light. So the first decision you have to make is, are you a generalist or are you a specialist? And then you have to pivot your sales process accordingly. So you're either going to have to focus on a lot of education early on, or you're going to have to focus on a lot of waiting, and then being top of mind when it's time to present the correct opportunity to the prospect. So Madison, you've been doing this for how long now?
About 60 days.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the perception that buyers are already 80% of the way to making a buying decision well before they talk to a company. Has that been your experience?
Not right now. Not right now.
Like when you're speaking to a company, had they even considered changing IT providers before you spoke with them?
Depends on the provider or the company at this point, but for the most part, no.
Okay. So 60 days on average, how many calls are you making every day?
Make about 45 calls in about 3 hours, give or take.
A 3-hour shift, 45 dials within a 3-hour shift. And how many opportunities per month do you schedule right now?
About 3.
Okay. And of the 3, how many of them were already in the market for a competitor before you called them?
None of them had been at this point, actually.
All right. So the idea that 80% of the market has already made a decision about what they want to do, in my opinion, is completely false. You can plant the seed of wanting to do something different in a company where they have never considered doing something different. So that's why cold calling works. And I've never recommended it as the only way to interact with new prospects. You can call them, you can email them, you can engage with them on social media, and you can identify them at networking events. You can push them towards one-to-one events like sales appointments. You can push them towards one-to-many appointments like webinars, and all of them give you opportunities to engage on separate occasions in different ways. And you need to meet your prospects where they want to be met. Some people want to read an email, some people like to take phone calls, and some people spend their lives on social media. You got to find your prospects where they are and create an outbound cadence that allows you to figure out what that's going to be. So if part of your cadence is call, email, and your calls never get returned, but your emails always get opened, you'll know that that particular prospect prefers to interact via email, and you can tailor your outbound approach to focus by preference. So you can create different buckets when you're marketing. You can create buckets by pain points or interests, and you can create buckets by interaction preferences. So I don't do a lot of social media outside of just making sure that my company looks like we've been in business for as long as we have. I like to keep it updated on a regular basis. I think regardless of what thing you choose to promote your business, you have to pay a little bit of attention to the other things because people will go looking for you. So if you call somebody to talk about cloud and you share a little bit about your business, most of the time, the first thing somebody's going to do is go look at your website. Or maybe they're going to go on LinkedIn or see if you've got a presence on Facebook or Twitter. If you haven't updated your Twitter account since 2017, you start looking more like a guy in his basement than a competent professional IT provider. So you don't have to go all in on any methodology. Now, Madison's performing quite well on 10 hours a week. Now, how many hours do you, as the business owner of an IT services provider, have to make cold calls? Probably 10 or few hours a week. So technically, you should be able to achieve the same results as a university student who's been calling for 60 days. If you wanted to make an investment in your own time in cold calling, you should be able to achieve results, and you should be able to achieve results relatively quickly. And I would like to think that if you own an IT company, you're probably better at talking about cloud than Madison, although she's really got it nailed right now. And we're going to go through some of the successful calls that Madison has gone through over the last month. So a simple prospecting cadence can be built by anyone in anything, right? In this particular one, it would be a first call followed by an email, another phone call, and meeting set. I use this specifically because this seems to be the technique that is working best for Maddie at this time. So these are an overview of actual cadences that resulted in meetings this month. So Company A, first call was initiated on February 4th, and the meeting was set on March 3rd. So that's about a month in between the first contact and the meeting set, and 5 touches in between. Madison, tell me about this meeting.
So this meeting was for an architecture firm. They had about 20 seats. On the first call, I qualified the meeting. I was on the phone with a decision maker for about 10 minutes. And I found out who they were working with, or more rather, what type of contractor they were working with. And I found out more about the IT environment, and I found out how they were feeling about the contractor.
Okay, so you were speaking with the decision maker from the very first call.
Yeah.
And you identified on the first call that they weren't happy with the way that they were currently receiving support.
Yes.
So what was the thing that prevented you from getting the meeting on that first call?
I think she just wasn't ready to make a decision just yet. She asked me for a follow-up email and asked me to call her back the following week. And for all of February, we were pretty much just playing phone tag. I kept missing her at her desk and leaving voicemails, and it took a lot of follow-ups.
Okay, I only see 3 on this timeline. So how many follow-ups were required?
1 email and 3 follow-ups, but I guess right.
So we're almost there.
Yeah.
All right, so for this particular company, there was 5 touches necessary before we got to the point where the meeting was set. Did you learn anything new on the conversation before the meeting set that you didn't know on the first call?
I did find out one thing on the call when I set the meeting. I found out that their IT person who they were dissatisfied with was retiring.
Okay, so this meeting happened on the 3rd of March. How did it go?
It was not a good fit. Unfortunately, they were an all Mac environment, and my company works only with PCs.
So how did you pivot your process and strategy after that to make sure that that doesn't happen again?
So from there on, when I qualify leads now, I ask them what type of environment they're working with, whether it's Mac or PC.
How long had you been calling when you got this appointment?
I've been calling for about a month.
And this particular lead came with, so you had been cold calling for a month before this one happened?
Oh no, when I made the first call, this was my first day of calling, and by the time the meeting was set, it was about a month later.
Okay. So on a scale of 1 to 10, if you were going to rank this call as, 1 being the worst call you ever made, 10 being the best call you ever made, where does this one live?
This is probably around maybe a 6.5. I should have made sure that it was not an all Mac environment when I first made this call.
So that's an important thing for everyone to remember. Like, as you're learning things on calls, you've got to change and update your strategy so that you don't forget these things. There's nothing worse than spending. So this was a 5-call, 30-day cadence. If you were trying to engage with a company that was involved with a competitor and had 2 years remaining on their contract, where you had to call and call and call and call and continue to stay top of mind, if you didn't qualify at the very beginning that they were a Mac environment, you just spent 2 years and possibly up to 10 hours of your time chasing down a lead that should never have been in your pipeline. So if you can do a first call qualification, especially in cloud, that is essential to ongoing success. And as you scale up, the things that you forget impact your calling environment greatly. So when you're creating an SOP for a caller that you hire, for example, you want to make sure that you're thinking about the things that may be a little bit out of the box, because it probably wouldn't have occurred to me, 40 years later. I've been doing this a really long time, and I wouldn't have thought to ask if it was a PC or a Mac environment on the first call either. So that's not out of the ordinary. But if you can add that to your standard operating procedure, now you've got a significantly better qualifying process, and that's going to ensure that your callers aren't wasting their time burning leads that aren't qualified. Right. So this is the second meeting that you've scheduled in the last month. Tell me about this one.
My first call was with a gatekeeper who wouldn't put me through to the decision maker, who was an operations manager, but I did qualify the lead at this point. I found out the name of the operations manager. I found out what type of company they were, how many seats they had, who they were working with. And with that information, I was able to contact the decision maker by my third follow-up when I set the meeting.
Okay, and then tell me about the company itself. Why are they looking for an IT provider?
So they were working with a competitor of ours, and they were not thrilled to be renewing their contract.
So this is almost the perfect storm of opportunity. What made it a good cloud opportunity over a managed services opportunity?
They had a server that was aging out, so that was perfect.
So normally, are you speaking only about cloud when you're calling now, or do you talk about cloud and managed services?
I tend to focus just on cloud for new opportunities. But if it's, for example, if I'm on the phone and someone says, hey, actually, we bought a server last week or last month, and it's very recent, I will kind of talk about a more of a managed service opportunity at that point. And if they are interested in hearing more, I forward our managed service offering information to them.
Okay, and then does somebody else take over from that point in the process, or are you involved in the managed services appointment set as well? Like, do you have to connect or collaborate with another person on the team where you work?
I just double check that they would like me to follow up on the managed service offering with my manager. And from then I'll just keep going and try and set the meeting. And if they take the meeting for the managed service offering, then obviously it gets passed on to a sales rep.
So it's something to consider when you're building out your sales team. If you're going to add in new sales talent that are going to focus exclusively on one offering, you're going to want to make sure that you enable them to share data with the rest of your organization in a way that makes sense. So a process addition or a process flow or an automation added in that will allow somebody to identify, like, hey, this isn't in my scope, right? I don't sell this. This has to go over to this team. So if it's your first time adding to your sales team where you're going offering specific versus territory specific or geography or size specific, you have to make sure that there is a way that people are communicating within your company. And that's something that doesn't happen all the time. And a lot of opportunities get lost because you assign somebody to make a certain type of call to a certain type of prospect. And when it's identified that this isn't a fit for that offering, I mean, here you've got potentially a perfect managed services offering that doesn't want a cloud offering. Are you really going to let your sales rep drop that on the ground, or are you going to find a way that you can transition that over? So either empower your cloud sales reps to also talk about managed services and vice versa, or as part of your sales playbook, make sure everybody understands what happens when they find an opportunity that would be good for the business, but not necessarily in their lane.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Being able to hit the ground running and being pragmatic when it comes to these things and knowing when to pivot, it's hugely important.
So, I mean, you're not using a CRM to manage your data right now. Tell us about how you manage your calling day.
I use an Excel spreadsheet, and I have kind of all the columns of information from when I was handed the list, and I added some extra things. So I added columns for when I first approached them, for when I will next approach them, and when I last approached them. And then if I found out any additional information, I have a column for that. And if I get any direct phone numbers or names of decision makers, I can add that into a separate list and then a disposition option. But the way, obviously with a CRM, sometimes for the most part, you are able to have them kind of like filter in on the day. With an Excel spreadsheet, you don't have that. So I developed a color coding system that when I see this color, I know I need to call back in a week. Oh, I need to call back later today. So the color coding actually really helps. And another benefit to having the Excel spreadsheet is that you can control and find any given day. So when I get to work, I will control find the day that I'm working. I'll put, the 16th of April, 2021. And then with that, every single callback that I need to make that day is highlighted. And then I just outline the box.
Okay. So I think the point that I would like to make here is that you don't need a perfect environment to be a great sales rep. So if you as a business owner are interested in starting outbound prospecting to grow your sales this year, one of the things I see is that, well, we'll start after we get a CRM, or we'll start after we do this, or, next quarter after X, Y, and Z happens and the moon is in Jupiter, then we'll start making calls. Whereas, Madison sat down, built a spreadsheet, started making calls, and is achieving success just using Excel. And quite frankly, Madison's not a power user of Excel, right? Like, you can use a pivot table. We don't know how to make one, so we don't have one. But, as tech people, I assume that you probably understand Excel a whole lot better than I do, or than Madison does, and you might be able to create something that works even better for you. Don't get too hung up on the details. It sounds like you just need 6 columns and a highlighter in order to make an effective cold calling process for yourself. So let's talk about this opportunity. This looks like probably like the perfect storm opportunity, just looking at the numbers on the sides. So tell us what happened.
It was. So I first approached them in March. It's a nonprofit research center. And I first, again, spoke with the gatekeeper, and I got a lot of information there, and I was asked to pass on some information to the executive director. I sent them an email, and I followed up with a call the following week, and that person was working from home, so I didn't get them on the phone. Then the same day after I'd left work, I got an email back from the director saying, "Hey, I'm really sorry I missed your call. I'm very interested. Please touch base with me next week." And so I did, and they weren't in the office. And so I waited a little bit, and I called them back yesterday, and I spoke with them, and we talked a little. I just reconfirmed some of the details that I got from the gatekeeper, but I also found out that their server was about 10 years old. So it's just a matter of time that something will happen, right? So I said, look, let's set a meeting. I'm really eager to get you guys onto the cloud, because also their employees were doing the IT support. So yeah, it was a perfect storm.
Now, this opportunity isn't like, it's not right across the street either. That's what makes this opportunity so interesting to me, is that this is not in you could not roll a truck to this location.
Yeah.
So for Madison Works in Canada, this opportunity was located like way, 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 way up north. Right, so it's nowhere near the office. It is definitely not something that I would have considered for a managed opportunity, but the cloud is opening the door for you to sell nationally if that's appealing to you. So the positive to that is, hey, you can sell cloud to anyone, anywhere. The negative to that is, so can everyone else. Right. So whereas your geography might have been very secure to you previously, right? People like to do business locally, and you've got a lot of good relationships in the market. But now we're going to have much larger managed services, like platform-based companies with some economies of scale coming into our markets, with lower prices and more sales reps. So there's about to be a pretty interesting land grab, meaning that it's just going to be a free-for-all. The next 5 years are a free-for-all. So either you capture the business now, or you wait until that incumbent provider is going to be displaced. So if you don't win the business now, you're sitting back and waiting, the same as a managed services opportunity. So the best part about cloud sales right now is you can win right now instead of having to wait 3 years for their contract to expire. Most rational business people don't make buying decisions because Madison called them and offered them a really interesting cloud opportunity, right? There's not a lot that Madison's going to be able to say that's going to convince someone to break a contract with a group they've been working for 5 or 6 years, right? They already have trust developed. It's easier to fix a problem with a vendor that you already know and like than it is to risk rolling the dice on hiring a new vendor. So bumping an incumbent is hard, right? We learned this from politics as well. Most of the time, the person that's already in office stays in office. It's very rare. I don't even know how many one-term presidents there have been, but it's significantly lower than the number of two-term presidents. And that's because people stay where they're comfortable. Complacency will always be your biggest competitor. We've always done it this way, or we're happy with what we have, is going to be the thing that loses more deals than, this guy could screw up. Like most of the time, your IT provider could screw up phenomenally. And as long as they fixed it and apologized, you're not going to go looking for a new one. Right? We tend to allow vendors that we like and trust, we give them a little more grace. Right? So there would have to be a phenomenal thing that happened, or a perfectly timed phone call. And you'd be surprised how often those perfectly timed phone calls come. It isn't luck, it's a process and a cadence and a strategy developed by the person calling out. So the more competent you get at outbound calling, the better you can figure out how to create a cadence or process that's going to work for you over and over and over again. So 60 days is not a great barometer to measure performance, right? It's not a lot of data, but lots of the time, somebody doesn't care about the data when you're performing. So when you're getting meetings, nobody cares. Right? It's when the meetings stop coming that everyone wants to know what you're doing all day. So if you're on the call today and you are a cloud sales professional and not a managed services business owner, it's essential that you're tracking what you're doing. If you want to be more successful at it, you've got to identify the things that are going right and make those better. You've got to identify the things that trip you up and eliminate them. So we talked about this a couple of slides ago. If you always keep forgetting to qualify on the first call and you've only got 10 hours a week to work, you could fundamentally spend a third of your work time just chasing down stuff that you shouldn't have been calling anyway. So the more efficient you can be, the more deals you can find. And more importantly, like, this is a numbers game. And we've had talks about this over and over, Madison and I. Our numbers at Managed Sales Pros are somewhere between 200 and 300 dials to get to one appointment. And it very much depends on the brand of the company when we begin dialing. So a well-known company in a large city, that number will probably be closer to 200. A brand new company in a small city where there's no brand recognition and everybody knows everybody, that's going to be a significantly harder campaign. So there's always going to be things that are going to impact how many appointments you can get. But the biggest thing that impacts the appointments that you're getting is the number of dials that you're making. You want to make sure that you're maximizing your dials all the time. And Madison, it sounds like you're doing a great job of that.
Yeah, I'd just like to add as well, when we're talking about the numbers game, if you do choose to work with an Excel spreadsheet, I realized that one thing that was slowing down my productivity immensely was actually just going through the follow backs and finding, what I needed to call and then moving on from that. So the system that I use now, which allows me to get more calls in per day, per hour, is starting with the first approaches. So I will highlight, 30 calls that I'm going to make, get that done in 3 hours, and then do all of my follow-ups, because a significant chunk of your time will be sucked out with follow-ups going through Excel.
How much time do you spend doing research before you make a phone call?
So what I do is usually when the phone is ringing, I will go onto their website and I'll see how much information I can find off the bat. And then I'll just keep it up while I'm there.
So you're not making a list, researching who you're supposed to call, researching what their title is, right?
No.
So that's another thing I want to point out is that you can do all the research in the world and fail miserably. So one of the things that makes me absolutely nuts is people believing that somehow creating more curated lists is going to create better engagement. Creating a list that isn't filled with companies that went out of business last year, yes, that's important. Figuring out who the decision maker is, that is not important. A quick phone call into the organization when you're focused on first point of contact qualification, which is one of the things that Madison's doing, finding out how many computers there are from anybody who answers the phone, finding out how much they're paying for IT support, if they'll reveal that information, with the first person that answers the phone. That's not always going to be possible, but anybody that answers the phone is going to be able to ballpark how many computers they have there. So you can look at, I mean, every company is a little bit different. We tend to focus on the 20 to 100 user space. Some of our clients start at 10 users, right? But from an ROI perspective, you're going to start making an investment in sales and marketing with hiring expensive sales talent or investing in a third-party company that's going to do cold calling for you. It's time to go upstream a little bit. You can't go after 5-seat opportunities and pay a sales rep to do it. You can't go after 5-seat opportunities and pay a third-party agency's margins to go after the smallest deals in the pipeline. And those small deals they're kind of interesting for cloud. So I see why they're appealing to some people. But that's either going to be the easiest close you've ever made, leading to the biggest nightmare you've ever experienced, or you're just going to keep trying to convince somebody of something that isn't of value to them yet. So at 5 computers, most businesses, and there's always going to be outliers, but at 5 computers, most businesses haven't experienced enough pain that they can translate IT support into value or IT support into more time for them to invest in their own business. So the smaller the company, the less likely it is that they're even a good opportunity to sell a recurring contract to. What's the thing that you found most interesting since starting cold calling, Madison?
Thing that I found most interesting. I had a call with a beekeeper that was very interesting, but with regards to actual calling, I found that, when you call in on the first dial, more often than not, if you say the person who's the decision maker that comes up on your list, they don't work there. I've had a couple of calls where that person has actually died, which is very awkward. And I found that actually there's more of a chance that I'll get to a decision maker if I say, hey, this is Madison calling from this organization. I'm calling about this cloud program. Is there anyone around that I can speak to about this? More often than not, the gatekeeper will be like, yeah, I know the person. I'll forward you to them. And before they pass me on, I'll say, does this person have the power to make purchases? And if they say yes or no, we'll move around from there. But that's been the most interesting pivot that I think has happened. So I don't waste my time saying, hey, does this person still work here? I just go right along.
So first point of contact qualification, right? Identify the decision maker, identify the opportunity. So if it's under 20 computers, we don't want it. If it's over 20 computers, we want to continue. And there's lots of ways that you can do that without saying, oh, sorry, you're too small for us. We don't want to work with you. Goodbye. And like, you got to be diplomatic. Next year, they might have 20 computers. So you absolutely don't want to be the jerk that said, we don't talk to companies like that, right? You really want to have a conversation that's more along the lines of, most companies find ROI with our services if they have at least 20 computers. And before that, it's really a larger investment and, it's not a great fit for us. So I don't waste anybody's time. How many computers does your company have? And most of the time, if you explain to them why you want to know how many computers they have, they're a little less put off by answering the question.
Yeah.
And there's, you get a little bit of why do you need to know that? And normally I say, well, it's very hard to give a quote on IT support without knowing how many computers you have. Has there been anything like that happened that you're just flabbergasted by? You said that there was a large fight yesterday.
Oh yeah. The other day I called someone and everyone's working from home nowadays. And I called someone and his wife was yelling at him, or I assume it was his wife, was yelling at him to put the phone down. get off the phone. And he was like, can you call me back another day? That was a little awkward. I had a guy yell at me when I was 14 on my first job as well on the phone. That was a lot, but it's all about learning from those opportunities and bouncing back. You know, every call is a new call, and you pick up the phone and you're smiling like nothing happened.
So previous jobs before this, you worked for a daycare.
Yes.
How does this job compare to that?
This job is a million times better. Just on the HR side of things, the support that I've received, the people that I'm working with are just amazing. You know, I really loved the people that I was working with back at the daycare as well, but I just think that this job is so much more suited to my skill set. But with saying that, I don't think that I ever could have been in this position had I not had that job at that daycare. So it was a huge learning curve for me, but they're totally different jobs. But, you know, sometimes you still get the odd tantrum.
All right, I want to share a little bit about what my clients have been doing to explore land and expand opportunities in the cloud. And the thing that we're seeing the most right now that's achieving the most results or the most meetings about potentially moving to the cloud is talking about smaller opportunities with things like Teams. So I want to share a little bit about the things that we've been talking about on our outbound calls at Managed Sales Pros to give you some ideas of what you could be doing within your company. So the first thing is training, Teams training. So everybody that buys Office 365 has Teams, and it doesn't cost them anything extra, but they're also using multiple other apps to achieve the same thing that Teams could be doing for them. So one of the things we've seen a lot of success with is offering complimentary Teams training opportunities to your prospect base. So if people want to come and learn how to take advantage of this free thing that they have and see if they can replace some of the other things that they're purchasing, you can create a webinar just overviewing basic skills. You could create a series of webinars, have 4 of them, 2 weeks apart, and have your calling team push people to register for that. So if they're not ready to talk about buying managed services or buying cloud services, now you can talk to them about, well, you know what, we're offering this complimentary to, whatever your city is, so to Winnipeg-based companies who are already using Office 365. If you'd like to come and learn how to use Teams better, we meet every Wednesday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Can I register you for that now? Right, so now you've got the opportunity to start creating a funnel using a complimentary offering. And I guarantee you guys, most of you are doing Teams training for your clients right now. So you've already got all the content at your fingertips. You can create a modified version of that. You don't have to give away the farm, but next time you're training one of your clients on how to use Teams, why don't you just hit the record button? There's lots of ways to create webinars where you don't actually have to be on the webinar actively. And right now, that's we could record this and pretend it was live 6 months from now. You could play it over and over again. So you can do this a couple of different ways. You can offer them a complimentary on-demand training course that you can then brand for them. So if you're trying to win a piece of business from a company you know is already qualified, has the appropriate seats, and that they're in that buying cycle decision, if you want to stand out from your competitors, you can send them a pre-recorded training session completely branded with your information and their information. So the same way that you would prepare for a proposal presentation or a sales presentation, you can just create something for them. And now they've got it, and maybe they'll use it every time they make a new hire, right? But now you've got a little bit of real estate on their desktop where they're either adding this into their new hire training programs, or they're just reviewing it themselves. But it gives you the opportunity to get your name and logo in front of a prospect on a regular basis. You can offer paid Teams training, and I've seen a lot of people generating fairly significant revenue. You create the training once and you sell it again and again and again, right? So it's a one-time hit of time and maybe some graphic design, but now you've got the opportunity to offer prospects something that gives you a foot in the door. So not everyone wants to sell a $1,000 app or a $5,000 training course or what have you. Some people just want to go right for the managed services win or the cloud services win, but land and expand is working. If you can get in while they're working with another IT provider, either with an app or a training service or a solution is going to be valuable to them that doesn't require them to displace the company they're working with now. So if you're going to offer them Teams training and the company that's supporting them hasn't offered that to them yet, they don't have to fire that guy to hire you to do this. Now you get to come in, maybe bring in some coffee and donuts, start chit-chatting, meet people, and then continue to follow up. Now you are an expert. You're the person that they go to with questions. And eventually that level of expertise, that level of rapport and trust is going to lead to the opportunity to bid on their business. Like I would almost guarantee you that if you can convince them to allow you to come in and train them on something, eventually you're going to convince them to buy more and more things from you until you have their entire managed services business. So I wouldn't offer this to unqualified prospects. So part of your sales process will now pivot so that you can have a cold caller talking not just about managed or cloud, but about some of the other smaller things that you're offering as well. I can't stress how important this is. Selling phones is super easy. It's much, much easier than selling IT, right? Everybody has a phone and everybody understands what a phone is, and everybody understands that they've had the same one on their desk for 20 years, right? This is a great time to be talking to people about other opportunities, including phones. So whether that is a voice over IP install or just replacing what they're currently using with something else, you've got a great opportunity to go in and have a conversation about that. And it's way easier to say, like, how many phones do you guys use there, than it is to get somebody to start talking about a complicated IT infrastructure. But whatever it takes to get on their calendar. So if you don't want to sell phone systems, that's fine. Go to the meeting and tell them, you know what, I don't think this is going to work out. But you've still got the opportunity now to sit in front of them for an hour. So whether you want to sell them 20 phones or not, take the meeting, because it's a qualified opportunity. And now you're going to get to nurture that opportunity to fruition. And you're going to have a whole lot better opportunity at winning it than somebody who has never spoken to them before will. So if you can consider all things being equal in a relatively small market, like the one Madison lives in, or like the one I live in Lansing, Michigan now, it's not very big. If there are 6 competent managed services providers in this area, and all 5 of them, one of them has the business and the other 5 are trying to get it. Now, you being one of the 5 that are trying to get it, you're going to have a much better chance beating out the other 4 if you've already engaged with that company on something. So you may not want to add training or voice to your land and expand portfolio, but it would greatly benefit you at this time in the market to start offering things that people could consider buying without displacing their current provider. And you can make a list of those and then just listen for the pain points that would indicate that it would be a good time to talk about any of those land and expand strategies. Using Teams for project management is another thing you can either host free webinars on or offer training on, right? People are not taking advantage of this tool right now. And I think a lot of people, pre-pandemic really weren't focused on Teams at all. And then Teams became a far better product by the end. Well, I guess we're not at the end of the pandemic. A year later, Teams is a significantly better product that people can now take much more advantage of. And they're not doing it because they don't know how, right? People are using Teams like they used to use Skype, and they're not investing in education to learn how to use it better. And a little bit of education could save these companies a significant amount. Like, think about the number of things that I'm using that could be replaced by Teams if I was using it better. And now you've got an entire sales pitch on how you can eliminate this overhead and help them use a tool that they're already paying for, or that's already included in something that they're buying. So a webinar, again, that you push your prospects to, where you can educate them on something and allow your logo to be in front of them again, and allow them to watch the replay, allow them to give the replay to people that they're training about the way that they're doing business. You could really impact the productivity of this company. And the more times you can find a way to help somebody improve their business processes, the more likely it is you're going to be the person invited to the table when it's time to do something more expensive. Collaboration is a big one. I think we're going to see a huge shift away from Slack this year, and you can have those conversations as well. And the thing that I really am finding exciting right now, and I really want to talk about on outbound calls, is how people can use Teams for better recruiting. right? We're still not meeting people face to face. There are people that I hired 9 months ago that I've never met in person. And I think that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. But I think business owners that are being forced to pivot, whether they wanted to run remotely or not, never really set up the ability to interact with their potential employees or the people they've hired who have never come into their office remotely. So how can you help solve this enormous business problem for your prospects? And can you either offer teams training, land and expand opportunity, or a webinar that teaches them how to use Teams in the recruiting process? How does it link to other things? So one of the best parts of this is while you're talking about Teams and what it does and how magical it is, Teams also integrates with how many other platforms and applications on the market now. So I know that we use Zoho as a CRM. I can interact with Zoho in my Teams instance now. I can have a meeting with a client in their instance of Teams, and we can pop up a lead from their instance of Zoho that we can then talk about right in that meeting. So as you're selling the idea of using a tool that they've already purchased, you can expand your footprint there and your wallet share by suggesting other things that they can implement into Teams. So maybe they're using Teams and they're not using SharePoint. Now you've got the opportunity to talk about how they would use SharePoint. You have the opportunity to sell them SharePoint, and now you're one step closer to another opportunity. So you don't have to sell all or nothing. Some people do make the choice to do that, but it's good to consider ways that you can get yourself in front of a company over and over and over again. So what can you sell to their marketing department? What can you sell to their HR department? What can you sell to finance? What can you talk to sales about? If you can have a talk track prepared for larger organizations who are not wearing 100 hats, now you've got not just 5 things to talk about, but you've got 5 different points of entry into the companies that you're prospecting into. So now you don't have to be obsessed about having to talk to the CEO or the owner of the business. You can talk to the marketing person about how they can do some specific things with technology. And that gives you the opportunity to be championed into the person that's going to make the ultimate decision, who's going to who's going to choose their new IT support provider. If it's not going to be that person, no problem. You're going to develop a relationship with that person. They're going to take your brand to the decision makers. So those influencers, they can't be ignored. So it's not a short-term strategy. Land and expand takes a long time, but the more opportunities you have to be in front of businesses, the more opportunities you're going to have to close those deals in the future. So we have a little bit of time left. How can Managed Sales Pros help? Well, Managed Sales Pros can do your prospecting for you. If you want to go looking for cloud opportunities, we would be more than happy to assist you. We trained Madison before she went to work at the company that she's working with now. And we've trained dozens of other callers for other MSPs as well. We can also create your entire sales prospecting process for you. We can create your SOPs, we can create your playbooks, and we can hand them off to you, or we can then train other people on how to use them. Now, looking for the Q&A panel, I, again, have not figured out how to use this platform. And we did practice it. I'm not a chat. I'm looking now. There we go. So the question is, Madison seems particularly well organized and professional. Is she the norm or an exception for a part-time cold caller? What do you think the answer to that is, man?
Sorry, I didn't realize my mic was muted. Good question. I think I have been trained from a young age on how to be professional. And obviously being around such incredible businesswomen my entire life, it's just natural to pick those things up.
Yeah, full disclosure, Madison is my daughter. She's been cold calling since she was in diapers.
So I think with the right amount of training, anyone can get to where I am. With the right amount of care and with the right person in charge of training, anyone can get to where I am. And I think it's just a matter of nurturing the people in your work environment too. If they're happy, that'll translate in the work. You know, if they're feeling good about what they're doing, if they're feeling encouraged, that'll get them anywhere.
So Nate, like the way that I would describe this is if someone can follow a process, they can be an excellent cold caller. It doesn't, like, you don't have to be related to the owner of a cold calling company. I mean, obviously, Madison had the opportunity to go work for a managed service provider because I knew that person and was able to position her for success there. But you can train anyone. Like, we hire right out of workforce readiness programming. So the people that come to work at my call center, they may have gotten out of prison 3 days earlier. They might have been living in a homeless shelter, or they could be the benefit of some food insecurity programming in Nevada. So, Madison is an exception in that she is a third-year university student that studies languages and is a debate society member. She organizes herself well for presentations, and we practiced several times before the webinar. So were you this good day one on the phone?
Well, I didn't get a meeting on my first day, but I did get a lead. But again, when I was 14, I was probably very nervous. It's hard to think back to like being like 6 years ago. It's crazy that I started that young, but yeah, I was probably very nervous, and I wasn't nearly as prepared to work as I am now.
Somebody said it was clear that since you were my daughter, you were exceptional. And,